Hi, I'm Maria Noel Groves, owner of Wintergreen Botanicals in Allenstown, New Hampshire. Today we're going to make capsules, and capsules are something most people tend to buy when they go to the store and not realize that it's actually something that's very easy and inexpensive to make at home. I always like to talk about the pros and cons of various types of remedies, and probably my absolute favorite remedies to work with are teas as well as tinctures. Teas are, of course, water-based extracts, and tinctures being alcohol-based extracts. And those are both really great extracts. Both of those solvents are very good at extracting a wide range of properties from plants. And they're generally pretty convenient to take, they're very easy to make, and they're very easily absorbed by the body. And that's probably one of the primary advantages, is that those solvents, whether it's the water or the alcohol, or in tinctures usually there's a little bit of both water and alcohol involved, those are going to be pulling or pre-digesting a lot of the constituents of the plants out and making them readily available to the body without even needing to be digested. Capsules, on the other hand, are very convenient to take, and you don't have to taste anything, so a lot of people like them, especially if they're coming from more of a conventional medicine system where I just want to take a pill, I don't want to have to taste it, I don't want to have to think about it. But you do have to actually digest the pill. It has to go through the digestive tract, into the stomach, break down, and then get absorbed up through the intestines and then into the bloodstream. And so for some people, they may find that capsules don't work quite as well, because possibly part of it is that their digestive system isn't quite functioning as ideally as possible, and that's really common, especially in our country, that people don't have great digestion. However, nonetheless, capsules are still a really easy way to get a plant in. You are kind of leaving it to your body to pull the constituents out of the plant, and for some things like minerals, your digestive tract may actually do a much better job than especially alcohol and possibly water. So nutritive herbs sometimes are capsuled, especially things that are high in minerals like calcium, magnesium, and some herbs that would be good examples of that would be stinging nettle, oat straw, horsetail, alfalfa. In fact, there's a company, Jeans Greens, that sells a product called Noah Capsules, and it's N for nettle, O for oat straw, A for alfalfa, and H for horsetail. And basically it's a calcium mineral supplement that's used usually for strong bones, and a lot of people do really nicely with that. Also, I find capsules a really easy way to take herbs that might be difficult to get in adequate doses otherwise. So turmeric is a good example. We can definitely cook with turmeric, but especially if people don't have very diverse taste buds, it might be hard to work in a spoonful of turmeric every single day, and so therefore capsules come in very handy. It is good to note dose dependency. If you have a spoonful, like a heaping teaspoon of a herb, that's generally going to fill approximately 10 capsules. So it depends on how much of the herb you need to take and how many capsules you're willing to take. But turmeric is a really popular herb to take in capsule form, especially if you add a little bit of black pepper to the powdered turmeric before you encapsulate it. That's going to help you absorb it a little bit better, and it works really fantastically, just maybe 2 to 4 capsules a day for folks for arthritis and all sorts of other things. So I do think capsules are really handy. Some other examples that I personally use would be kelp in capsule form, because kelp is kind of funky tasting. I throw it in my soups and I do some cooking with it, but if I wanted to take a really steady dose, then I might consider encapsulating it and taking it that way. And really, it's so much cheaper to make your own, and you have complete control of what's going into that capsule, including the capsule material itself. These are capsules that you can get by the bag from Mountain Rose Herbs. However, there are plenty of other companies that sell them too. I just tend to buy things from Mountain Rose, and that makes it pretty easy. And they come in different sizes. That's important to know. So these are double O's. That's what I tend to work with. And the double O size tends to hold about 500 milligrams of powder per capsule, but that will vary a little bit from herb to herb and how finely you grind your herbs if you're grinding them yourself. And so these capsules come apart. I don't know if you can see that there, but we have a big side and a little side, and then they just snap together, and so you can put them together and then you actually physically snap them shut. And you can do it by hand. It's really tedious to do it by hand, but if you just need to make a couple capsules, that can be very convenient and inexpensive to do. Or you can also get a capsule machine, and this is just a really small one, again, that I got from Mountain Rose Herbs, but there are other companies that have them, and some of the larger or better supplement stocked natural food stores will carry various capsule machines, and these kind of help speed up the process. So I'll show you how to use that, but I'll also show you how to do it by hand. I once took a flight down, took a nice fall down a flight of stairs and hurt myself pretty badly, and so I went to the kitchen cupboard. Once I could hobble to the kitchen cupboard, I went to the kitchen cupboard and I mixed together some powdered turmeric, some powdered ginger, a little bit of powdered cayenne, mixed them in a bowl, and just encapsulated a couple for me to take for the next few days for inflammation. It worked really nicely. So you can even use these in a pinch. So if you're going to make a capsule by hand, I'm going to start with a powdered one just to start, but I'll show you how to grind your own as well. You just put some powder into a small bowl. Whoop, a little bit messy. And this is astragalus. This is another herb that's actually pretty nice to capsule. And I'd recommend using a pretty small, short, wide bowl that's got a rounded bottom. You want to be able to kind of get your hands in there into the powder and kind of scoop everything up. And if it's too tall or if it's got more of a squared off bottom, it's going to be harder to do that. So you just kind of fill primarily the bottom. And you may not get to fill it quite as well by hand as you would if you were using a machine, but it's still, like I said, it works in a pinch. And then you could fill a little bit in the top if you wanted. And then just scoop those two together. And you've got a little capsule. And you just keep repeating that. And so this is a good activity if you're going to be doing it by hand, or even if you're doing it with a machine. It's a good activity to do while you're hanging out with somebody across the kitchen table chit-chatting, or if you're in front of the TV watching a movie. For a while I was taking shatavari in capsule, and just to maintain my dose, I was going through quite a few a day, and so I would just sit, basically a movie would keep me stocked for the next week or two, and then the next movie I would have to encapsulate a few more, and that was done with a machine. So that's one way to do it. There are also capsule machines. And let me back up a little bit because I didn't finish talking about the different sizes. There also, you'll find single O's, find double O's, you'll find triple O's. If you're going to use a capsule machine, the O's determine what size the capsule is and how much it holds. So you can kind of tell just by looking at it. Some are smaller, some are bigger. So it depends on how much you need. I find double O's are a kind of good basic amount. But if you're going to buy a machine, you want to make sure that you buy a machine and capsules in the same size, because if you have a single O machine that you picked up at the store, and then the store also sold capsules, but you ended up with the wrong size capsule, a lot of times they carry both, but they might be out of stock of one or the other. So you may think, I got a machine, I got capsules, I'm good to go. Those were all they were selling, so those must belong together. Not necessarily. I find a lot of times that they have machines in one size and capsules in another size just because one or the other sold out. So make sure that the size matches. So you can see on this one here, if you can look really close, it says double O on the size, and so you can check that out before you buy it. And like I said, double O's are a good basic one. You can also get capsules in two different forms. You can get veggie capsules, which are made from vegetable cellulose, or you can get gelatin capsules, which are made from animal gelatin. I generally buy veggie cellulose capsules for two reasons. One, a lot of times I'm doing capsules for clients or even more often in classes, and I do get a few vegetarians here and there, and so I don't want to offend them. I don't want to make something that they're not willing to take, so I just go for the veggie capsules. But also, veggie capsules are less apt to absorb moisture and get funky, and once your capsules start to absorb moisture, the empty capsules, when you go to try to put them in the machine, they're more apt to get stuck. So that's another reason why I use the veggie capsules. Gelatin capsules are a lot cheaper. Sometimes they're more easily available. So some people prefer to use the gelatin capsules. And you'll find that most manufacturers use gelatin capsules when you're buying encapsulated products in stores, but there are some that specialize in just using veggie capsules. It's totally personal preference. So if you want to actually powder your own herb, let's say you've dried something and you want to make capsules with it, motherwort might be a good example. A lot of people really love motherwort as a nervous system and a cardiovascular herb, but it is pretty much not available as a capsule in commerce. And maybe there's a company somewhere that makes it, but I haven't found it. Usually you have to buy it in tincture, or you can buy it loose. So you can either buy it loose and dry, or you can grow it yourself. It's a pretty easy plant to grow. And if you didn't want to do alcohol, that's usually the primary way that people take motherwort, is in an alcohol extract. You might consider a capsule. You could also do vinegar. There are always many ways to take herbs, so you find which one works best for you. But most people don't want to drink a tea of motherwort. It's pretty disgusting tasting. It's very bitter. So capsules work quite nicely. And so you can just take your powdered herb, or your cut and sifted herb, and put it in a grinder of some sort. So this is stinging nettles. And I'm just going to use the magic bullet. It works really well. However, you can also use a coffee grinder. Those work really well, and you can find other grinding things as well. Sometimes a blender or a food processor works okay. Blenders actually work pretty well for really fluffy things like calendula flowers or linden that actually might be kind of hard to grind in a smaller grinder, because everything kind of puffs up to the top and then gets stuck, and you've got the spinner spinning at the bottom and all of your herb is up at the top. But for things that have already been broken down a little bit, are not quite so fluffy, these smaller grinders work really well. You can also get spice grinders, same concept. It's definitely easier to powder leaves and flowers and those kinds of things, and barks and roots, depending upon the plant, can be easy or almost impossible to grind. So you can buy them already powdered, and that's convenient. However, it's important to note that when you're buying powdered herbs, those are the most apt to be adulterated with anything from maltodextrin to other herbs. It's just really easy for companies to sell powder, and you have no idea if there's something else in it that you weren't expecting. They'll also may sometimes use poor quality products. Like there have been cases of ginseng powder where they actually made a tincture, then pulled out the stuff that they were, the herb after it's been tinctured, and then dried it and ground it and sold it as ginseng powder. And at that point, almost all the medicinal properties had been pulled out in the first round in the tincture. But because it was in powder, unless you did quality control testing, it might be really difficult to do, and especially difficult for the home herbalist. So whenever you're harvesting your own plant, and if you're not harvesting your own, if you get it in as whole of a form as possible, it's easier to correctly identify the quality and the identity of the plant that way. So we're going to grind this up. It's going to be a bit noisy, and I like to just kind of shake it around so that I can get it as powdered as possible. Terrible sound. In traditional days before electricity, people would oftentimes do their grinding into a powder with a mortar and pestle, and herbalists who prefer not to work with electricity and loud noises and all that some folks still do prefer using a mortar and a pestle. It's a lot more work to do that way, and you may need to seek around to find a mortar and pestle that actually does a good job grinding. That's the base with the pestle that you can mush around things. Is sort of the classic symbol of old-time apothecaries. So you can definitely work with it that way. There are other more traditional primal kinds of ways of grinding up herbs, so you don't necessarily have to use electricity if you want to grind your herbs at home, and you don't want to use electricity. So I've got this. It's already relatively well powdered, but if I want, and for my purposes, I'm not really that picky. So if it's for me personally, I wouldn't necessarily go through any extra steps. I'd be fine using it as it is. But if you want to make sure it's more closely powdered, you can take a strainer with a fine mesh, and you can use a bigger one. If you're doing a large batch, you'll want to use, a bigger size one, but just for demonstration, I'm going to use this little one. And then you'll just sift it through. You could also use a sifter if you have a sifter around. I don't actually happen to own a real sifter. And you just kind of tap it through, and the more finely powdered items are going to go down to the bottom. And then you'll end up with kind of some chuff at the top. You can regrind that. Eventually there'll be some pieces that just never really grind, and you can just compost them or use them to make tea. It's totally up to you. So this is much, much more finely powdered. So if you're a real stickler for perfection, this is going to work out a lot better. Also, if you wanted to powder your own herb for putting into smoothies, making like lozenges, those kinds of things, this technique works a little bit better than just plain grinding it, especially since we're usually working with home equipment that is not as intense as something that a company might have for grinding herbs into powders. Also, if you're going to make a percolation tincture, powdering it, grinding it, and then putting it through a sifter is more ideal than just plain grinding it. But for most other home remedy techniques, you don't necessarily need to go through that extra step. So, next up, we've got to fill our machine. This is our machine right here. There are different variations on a theme, but it's usually the same basic idea. You have a bottom part, so this is where the bigger size capsules go into. And then you have a top part, and this is where the tops of your capsules go into. And then a lot of times they'll also come with a tamper. And so this tamper is going to work to kind of press everything in. And you can do that just to get a little bit more into your capsule. And then you also usually get some kind of little swiper to help. I can't remember the official term, but just to kind of swipe things through. So we need to fill our capsule machine, and this is going to take a little while. But I'm just going to take apart. Sometimes it's easy to have them already taken apart and then you work with it. Or I just sometimes try to put, on one side I've got the big side and the big bottom, and then on the other side I've got the little side and the top part, and I just kind of pull apart. And so when you put them in, I put them in the wrong hand, switch those around. When you put them in, you're going to actually want to make them flush. And I don't know if I'll be able to kind of show you, probably not. But you can still kind of see them there. They're sticking up. You want to actually push them down so they're totally flush, because that's going to help when you're actually pouring the herb in. You want to be able to swipe them back and forth. If it's easier so that you can tell, because it's actually, even with the naked eye looking close at it, it's hard to tell where you put a capsule in already. Some people might want to leave them up a little bit, make sure they filled everything up, and then push them down. We make capsules in classes, and I find that it's the remedy that people seem to like or dislike the most and like the least, because it is very tedious. It's very, paying attention to really small things, and inevitably somebody, misses a hole and they end up with powder going through that side, or, especially after we reuse them several times in a class, without being fully cleaned in between, you might end up with the machines jamming, and that happens too. The machines are a little finicky to work with, but, you just need to be patient and not too nervous about it. So I'm just going to fill these up, and we'll come back in just a moment and they'll all be filled up. Okay, so we're pretty much there. They're all in. This is a 24 count capsule maker. You can get them in different sizes. If you want to make a lot more on a regular basis, then you might want a 50 or 100 count. And I don't know, they make them in bigger sizes than that too. 100 count capsule maker. And I'm just pushing everything in to make sure that everything's flush. Squeak, squeak, squeak. And the other thing you want to be careful of, especially for this particular machine, there are two different mechanisms on each one of these. There's a mechanism on the bottom that pushes in, and that's going to allow the capsules to fit in together, and then again for you to actually pop the capsules out of the machine. However, with this top part especially, it's really easy to jam. So you want to make sure that when you're pressing on it that you're pressing evenly, but you also want to make sure that when you're kind of squeezing things in that you don't tweak it so that that back, pusher is already at an angle, because that's going to really screw things up when you go to try to get everything out. Your capsules are going to end up in an angle in the machine, and they're really difficult to get out after that. You may lose a few in the process, or you may have to pull them out with tweezers and then toss them, or do it by hand. So we're just going to take, I'm actually going to use the astragalus for this one, and I'm just going to scoop it in. It's pretty simple. You put it on, this is for the bottom part, not the top part. The tops just get snapped on. You don't really fill up the tops at all. And so you're just going to scoop in some of the powder. And then, so you've got some powder just kind of filled in like that. I don't know, you can see really well, but, and then you're going to use the little pusher to kind of push things along. I actually switched my pusher around. I used to have one that was that came with it, but it's the only part of this machine that didn't seem to do well in the dishwasher. So I cut up some dishwasher safe plastic cutting boards that were like the thin kind, and ended up making some more of my own. So I've got kind of a first layer here. I'm going to use my tamper and just kind of, got to be a little careful with this kind of stuff. Tamp it down. This is a very powdery herb. And that gives me, when I tamped it down, especially since this is such a fluffy, powdery herb, it showed that my capsule was really only half full. So I'll get a lot more in each individual capsule if I use that tamper. I also try not to overfill too much. I can always add more later, but I don't want to, just kind of a pain. So yeah, I still have plenty of space in there. Push in a little bit more. That was around the edges. And then I think I can add a little bit more too. Plus I did poof a little bit of it out there. We don't do a whole lot of outtakes in these videos. We just kind of roll with it. Mistakes happen. Usually they're not problematic. If they are, fortunately, things are pretty inexpensive. Down. Each time I'm tamping down, the capsules look full, and then I tamp them down and realize there's plenty more space. It just presses that powder in a bit more, and there's plenty more space for me to add some more herbs. I think we're getting near the top here. And if you have any extras that didn't quite fit in, you can just kind of scoop those back in. And this particular capsule machine has a little opening on the side so that you can scoop things back out pretty easily. That way you can use that powder for something else. You want it to be, when you actually make the capsule, I mean, it's fine if there's some residual powder, but when you actually make the capsule, you want it to be relatively clear on the top, that you just have the powder mostly in the herbs, in the capsules, and not on the rest of the top of the machine. So now we have this part. I got a bit of powder on already. And now what we're going to do is we're going to combine. So you're going to fit that top part into the bottom. And then for this machine, and each machine might be a little bit different, but for this machine, we're going to press on the bottom pusher upper. And so I don't even hold the top side of the top's little pusher upper, lever, whatever. I'm just going to hold on the edges. And it squeezes in, and that's going to actually connect our two capsules. Usually it works. Occasionally there's one or two that doesn't quite connect. That's okay. It's not perfect. These aren't exactly like high-tech machines here. And then, oh, we had two losses, two of them that didn't quite connect, but I'll just kind of show you what that looks like. And so we'll put it in front of me so you can see the darkness. And these guys aren't quite snapped shut. Remember how you could put the capsule together, but it didn't actually snap until you physically gave it an extra push? So this is when you would actually snap it. You could do it later, but it's a little bit safer to do it now. And just a gentle push. You want to hear a little snap. You don't want to really jam though, because otherwise it could jam it into the machine. It just goes down maybe a quarter of an inch, if that. And so now they're all pushed in. I had my two that didn't quite get stuck. It's probably because my capsule machine goes through the dishwasher. That might be a little bit to ask of for a capsule machine. Let me see if I can tuck those in. Sometimes you can reclaim these and sometimes you can't. Maybe not. Oh well, maybe I'll need to do those by hand. And then once everything's all pushed in, the capsules are basically ready to go. Now we want to push them out. Important, push evenly. Like I mentioned before, you want to push evenly and gently and firmly on both sides. And so this is going to actually push out the capsules. And depending upon the machine and depending upon the powder that might have got stuck around it, how sticky it is, sometimes they pop right out. These ones, because the powder kind of got stuck in there, they didn't really pop totally out, but now they're very easy to just kind of pull out by hand. Now let's say you wanted to be absolutely sure. Generally speaking, when you've got a powdered herb and you put it in a double O capsule, you get about 500 milligrams of herb per capsule. And so if you're working with relatively safe herbs, having an approximate dosage is fine. You don't need to know exactly how many milligrams there are. But let's say you did really want to know, you know, it might vary a little bit from capsule to capsule, but maybe you really wanted to know how much you actually ended up with in each capsule. And for that, you can use a scale. You can have a specific amount of capsules that you're going to weigh empty, and then I would just zero out the scale at that empty amount, and then weigh the same amount of capsules full, and then you can divide it by that number. So we'll see how this works out, but we're going to try this with my scale here with a smaller quantity. So I've got a little container here that's already got 10 empty capsules in it. I'm going to put it on my scale. Zero it out. I'm going to switch it to grams. This is grams because grams are easier while we're measuring in milligrams, and then also grams are smaller increments. And then I'm just going to put 10 capsules on. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And so we have about 5 grams per those 10 capsules. That actually worked out really perfectly. So we've got about 5 grams, and if you divide that by 10, that comes down to 0.5, a half a gram per individual capsule, which is about 500 milligrams. So that actually worked out perfectly. If you have been grinding your own, you might find that it holds a little bit less than that 500 milligrams. I didn't try that out ahead of time, so I'm kind of pleased that that worked out as well as it did. So let me think. That's pretty much everything that you need to know about capsules. Once you've made them, you want to store them in a nice tight-fitting container. If you happen to have an extra desiccant bag on hand, you can throw that in there to prevent moisture getting into your capsules. Like anything, heat, light, moisture, oxygen, all of those things are going to degrade the quality of the plant material. Especially with powders. Powders are not only are they the easiest to adulterate, they're also the fastest to go bad. Because they're so exposed to the air and to the elements, they lose their properties very quickly. And so in the capsule, you have a little bit extra protection because you've encapsulated each little little bit of powder. So that capsule provides some protection, and then you put it in a jar. The jar is going to provide a little bit more protection. I would definitely store it in a cool, dark, dry spot, in a cabinet. If you're going to leave it on your counter, darker glass or a more opaque container might be better, especially if you're not going through it within a week or so. If it's just going to be out for a few days, a week, it's probably not a big deal. But if it's going to be sitting, this big bottle is going to be sitting on your kitchen counter for the next month or two, then maybe you would want to put it in some kind of a darker container. But once you've made your capsules, they should last, I would say, at least a year. You might find that the potency starts to drop off. And if you still have them after that, you can definitely use them, but just know that your potency might be degrading even more quickly. A lot of the capsules that you buy in stores, they give them a shelf life of about, I would say anywhere from 2 to 4 years, possibly even up higher than that. I find that sometimes stores have and manufacturing companies have a higher level of how long they think their product is good for, and herbalists tend to like to keep things really fresh and strong and turn them over a little bit more quickly. So 2 to 4 years, I wouldn't keep your homemade capsules around that long. And also, we usually don't have desiccant bags on hand. We're usually opening them opening the bottle as soon as we're there. So with something that's manufactured, they've got desiccant bags in there. They've probably sucked all of the air out of the jar before they've sealed it shut, and so most of that shelf life is before it actually gets open, whereas we're starting with an open bottle from the get-go. Your dosages of capsules is going to vary from plant to plant and person to person and ailment to ailment. Generally speaking, people are usually going to be taking anywhere from 2 capsules, although that's a pretty low dose for most herbs. Probably closer to 2 to 4. Usually you divide them up throughout the day, and usually, it depends again on the herb, the person, usually you want to take capsules with food because you want your digestive system to be going. If you just swallow plants in capsule form, your body has no idea that there's something coming down the pike to break down. This happens oftentimes with fish oil pills. People take it in the morning before they eat breakfast, or maybe with just their little cup of coffee or something, and then they're wondering why they have fishy burps later on. It's partly because their body had no idea that there was fat coming down the pike, and in the case of oils, fats are actually one of the hardest things for your body to digest. And our bodies rely on that signal of food in our mouth, our body chewing, that stuff coming down the pike, of really sensing what's coming down to tell the body what kinds of enzymes and compounds to make to help break that down. If we're taking it in capsule, all of that signaling is lost. So if you take it with food, you can hope that whatever your body is going to tell, whatever your mouth and your saliva and your enzymes and everything that goes on in your mouth tells the rest of your body and your digestive tract what's coming down the pike, that hopefully those same compounds will help you break down the capsule as well. And there are a few exceptions. There are some things that you do sometimes take on an empty stomach, but for the most part with herbs, we usually take those with food, or at least with a small meal, just to kind of kickstart that. So usually breakfast is a common time to take some capsules. Dinner time might be another time, and then if you're trying to get a more steady dose or a larger dose over a larger span of time, then some people will take it at lunchtime as well. And the dose might be anywhere from 2 to 6 capsules a pop. It really depends. I would always recommend starting low, starting with just maybe 1 capsule a day. See how you do with it, because even though you can control the dose by how many capsules you have, there's less control of how much herb you're getting per dose compared to in a tea or compared to in a tincture, where those are much gentler forms of herbs. They're pretty fast acting, and you can really control. With a tincture, you can take a single drop, or you can take a dropper full, or you can take a bottle if you wanted to, depending upon the herb, and you can really get a lot of control there. If that dose in 1 capsule, especially for a strong herb for a sensitive person, is too high, some people might find that more agitating, and the effects might not kick in for a half an hour to an hour later once that pill gets kind of absorbed. And so some people find that kind of frustrating, whereas you might be able to just take a couple drops of a tincture, wait 15 minutes, see how you're doing, take a couple drops more, and kind of gauge your dose that way. So as you can see, capsules aren't my absolute favorite way of working with herbs, but they are a really handy way, and it can be convenient for some people to use them. And it's one of those things that people kind of see as being something that only big companies make somewhere off in the distance. Over out in Utah, everybody's making the capsules with fancy machinery, and that it's not something that you can do right in your own kitchen, but that's totally not true. You can make them in your kitchen, and you can save a lot of money when I was making the Shatavari capsules. I had the option to use organic because I was able to get organic powder. I was having a hard time finding organic capsules, but I could find organic powder, and it was probably costing me anywhere from 1/10 to 1/4 of the cost for me to make them myself versus to buy the capsules already made. And since I was taking 10 caps a day to equal a teaspoon of powder, that was a pretty substantial savings. Yes, I did have to spend a lot of time with it, so that's a personal decision about your time and your money and which one is more valuable to you. So that's pretty much it for capsules. If you have any questions, feel free to give me a shout, and I hope you enjoy your herbal adventures. Take care.